capacity in the rest of Norfolk? Have we looked at it that way, or we just seem to keep putting money into stuff because we think there's a problem there? That's the way I've seen it so far.
I would say that specific question would be best answered by Lee. Many of the upgrades that we have done to existing sewage treatment plants, and Lee, you can correct me, is based on MOE's requirements.
I'm not disputing that.
No, so I mean, it's a question of while we're building new ones in Port Rowan and Delhi and now in Waterford, we still have to upgrade Port Dover and Simcoe as required. Lee, can you answer that better than I can?
Through the mayor to council, I think that there's a combination of two things that are occurring. One is the development pressures that the municipality is facing. And in order to address those development pressures, our facilities are at capacity and need to be upgraded. There are other facilities that are being required to be done as a result of requirements from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. And as we also have development pressures in those communities, we are making sure that we take them into account when we're addressing the ministry's concerns. So it's really not one or the other, it's a combination of both, and in some cases it's actually both in the same facility. But much of our upgrades have been a result of the fact that the development, for example, Port Dover and Simcoe, their existing facilities cannot handle any more growth without some additional work being done at those facilities.
Okay, and that's fine, I understand that. But do we, when we do these upgrades, are we building in capacity for future growth for X number of residential or commercial, whatever? And does that hold back on another, like we were held up in Simcoe here for a few years with water and sewer capacity. Our sewer capacity was the main one, sewer treatment plant. Do we build in extra capacity?
Through the mayor to council, absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily call it excess capacity or extra capacity. What in fact we do is we take the growth projections for the next so many years that council has commissioned that study from a consultant, and we design based on the growth projections, because let's just say that we don't want to overbuild it, because if the growth doesn't match what we're seeing, we'll have built infrastructure too big that our existing residents are paying for when there isn't the growth there to sustain it and to move it forward. So for example, we look at what the projected life capacity, operating costs, etc. are of the facility, and match the size of the facility to match the growth that would be expected over the life cycle of that facility.
Well, I'll leave my questioning, but I guess I start to wonder when we do all of them, what we really are planning for. I guess it's a math question I'm looking for. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Through the chairman to council, one of the things is our existing official plan does not have, I'm going to say, a path for growth identified in the official plan. So it doesn't say that we should be focusing on growth only occurring in Simcoe for 10 years and then moving on to Dover. Due to the geographic nature and the fact that our official plan doesn't have, for lack of a better phrase, a growth pattern or a desired place to actually grow, we're faced with development in all of our serviced urban areas. And as such, because we are so diversified, we have 5 different areas that require significantly sized large upgrades to address the situation. Whereas if, say, we were focusing on growth, for example, in only Port Dover, then we would have been able to delay some of the work that was being done in Simcoe because there wouldn't be any growth taking place in Simcoe. So we most certainly do that. We do it to the very best of our cost advantage. We look at all cost savings opportunities and try to maximize the amount of dollars, because staff certainly recognize that these facilities are by no means inexpensive, and it's an awful lot of money to be spending in multiple areas in the county.
Councillor Columbus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Comment and also some questions. The Delhi BIA fund, reserve fund, that, as was mentioned, that was actually grandfathered from the Township of Delhi days. And I recall that the first part of that money that was put aside, Township of Delhi money plus I believe some county money at the time, was for purchase of the parking lot right behind the Delhi Administration Office, Public Works Office. And for the most part, those parking spots are utilized by county staff and county vehicles, and not so much by shoppers. So I just wanted to mention that. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was this here reserve or development charges fund with respect to the Port Dover Marina. Why do we have a development charges against all the taxpayers or the developers when it comes to the marina, being that so few of our taxpayers actually use the marina compared to libraries and fire services and those types of ambulance bases? Why do we have that kind of philosophy with respect to development charges?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Columbus. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question at this time. I can go back to the last development charge study that we looked at and try and find some information for you. I know the last study, the Marina Development Charge Reserve Fund that we've set up, that was the very first time we've implemented a development charge for the marinas. So, but I'll get that information for you.
Okay, and does that go for Port Rowan Marina as well?
Again, I'll identify the projects for you, and
Okay.
I can't tell you off the top of my head if it's for both.
Thank you for that. And on page 37, the Port Rowan Marina Reserve Fund, the recommendation, the second one, and that an annual contribution of $30,000 from the tax levy be approved until own revenues support the Port Rowan Marina operations. When do we expect that place to be breaking even?
Again, through the Mayor to Councillor Columbus, I'll look into that information for you, which time that, when that actually, I may be able to answer that before the end of this session, but I'll need to look it up for you.
Like, what's our, I guess, if you could tell me what our income was from that facility, that would help.
I believe we've been running a small deficit over the last few years, but again, I'm not 100% sure.
So if we're running a deficit, that may never break even. Thank you.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. To speak on the marina charges, I believe that Port Dover is the one that gets the $242 per house for its development fees, while Port Rowan gets, well, it kind of gets gouged, to be honest with you, because they're charged a computer fee from the county, the finance fee from the county. The rate study that was supposed to be done in 2012 was never done. So if you're looking for losses, not doing the work gets you losses. Now, I guess through you, Mr. Mayor, to the finance, there's a lot of work here to be done. There's lots of reports and things like that. The whole bouncing of accounts, that shouldn't be a big deal, but do you expect to have to hire additional staff to get this completed?
Are you giving me permission?
Just checking.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is not part of the plan. We are planning on using our internal resources plus what we can get out of our new financial system to get the efficiencies out of there in order to give you this information on a more timely basis.
Thank you for that. And now, how will this be tracked? Will it end up in our action item list? Because like some of the things are bigger, like there's a comprehensive review of the building permit fees, or there's the user fee rate changes for the marinas. How's all this going to be tracked and reported back to council?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we could do is, with the next report coming, I believe the bylaw is next, we can put a section in that report on a timeline on the subsequent reports that we wish to bring to council. We did put a quarterly timeline on the actual overall reserve status. But as far as giving a definite timeline today, that's a little hard to do. But going forward, putting the timeline in the reports as they come, or perhaps on the action item list, that's that's a good idea, and perhaps we'll defer to the county manager to comment.
This council will have a number of choices. You can, of course, put it on action items as a simple default. But what I'd like to suggest, and rather than a motion to that effect, which sort of ties our hands to one exact course of action, it would be my strong preference that you not do that at this point in time. We have a summer break coming up. We have a team that needs to discuss a number of items and sort of make some plans, and would like to be able to discuss this, have some chance to discuss amongst ourselves, and then come back to you with sort of proposals and on more accurate timelines. So if it were this council's pleasure to not specify at this point in time, we are publicly committing to bringing you these reports. That's a very strong start. So that's something that can be relied on, at least to a certain degree, one would hope, and more specificity to come when the leaves are changing color.
Thank you for that. I'll move the recommendation in the report if you don't have one already, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councillor Geisens, and I'll get to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we go back to that slide that talked about what we have to do to get into a reserve, the $450,000?
That's the last slide. That's not in our report. It was on the screen.
It was here, wasn't it?
It was on the screen, yes, not in our report, but on the screen.
Okay, I know it's not on a report. Well, what I'm asking for here is to look at, there's a number of things that I hope that staff have taken into consideration, because the feds are now talking about raising interest rates, so that may affect us to some degree. And the other thing to take into consideration is inflation. And just wondering, I think it was $400,000, $460,000, 800, and that's an annual, and that will be compounded year after year. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that is one of the items that will not be a single increase. It'll be an incremental increase.
So that will be something like, if we look at what's here, it's 1.4 million, which is basically about 1.4% on top, because we're looking at it's probably about double that. So that's about 2.8% on the levy to keep that going from what I see. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't believe so. There's two items on there that will increase every year, and that's the first item and the third item.
Okay.
The other items is a one-time increase that we need.
Okay.
And also just to remind council, those numbers are what we calculated as of today. When it comes time to the budget deliberations, those may change.
And is inflation taken into consideration? Is that part of so we end up where we should be? I know it's a hard thing to say it's going to be 1%, 2%, or 2.5% or something like that, but is there a number that you could use to look at inflation? Because I don't think things are fairly stable now, and the petroleum is down, and our paving and everything is probably less, but that doesn't mean it's going to continue. So that will be something that'll take some cash out of our hands too. So I'm just wondering if you're looking at an inflation, at least some inflation.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the capital projects that we base this funding on, the projects that are further down the road, we do ask that inflation is incorporated into whatever placeholders we put in for those capital projects.
Thank you. Councillor Black?
Going to support the motion that's on the floor, and just to speak in favor of it. Again, to congratulate staff for bringing it forward. And it may be a tough pill to swallow, but if we don't do it, we're not being, in my mind anyway, we're not being responsible to our taxpayers and the people of Norfolk County to allow our infrastructure to deteriorate. I see it no differently than my own house. If I were to allow my house to deteriorate, my assets going down, my roof's going to leak, you know, it just won't do. You have to keep it up. This is a starting point only, so I recognize that. I know that we have some hard work in front of us, so thank you.
I have a motion by Councillor Height and a seconder of Councillor Geisens. It's printed on page 1. I'm going to paraphrase it quickly rather than read the whole thing. That we receive as information, that we approve the recommendations in the report, that we prepare draft reserve and reserve fund policies, that the bylaw 08-254 be repealed, a new bylaw be prepared to replace it, that our staff continue to develop strategies and financial policies, and that the 2018 levy-supported budget include an allocation for council to consider in order to automate reserves and reserve fund reporting, and finally that the 2017 supported operating budget this year include a $50,000 allocation to complete a development charge study for council's consideration, which will be funded through development charges. Any other discussion on this recommendation? If not, those in favor? Those opposed? That is carried. I just have a couple of comments. Number 1 on this, James, Amy, and Kathy. I know that staff have put hours and hours, probably hundreds of hours into this report. I've never really seen anything quite like it in my days here. And as you said, James, Kathy said rather, this is a start. This is one step, and I think it's a giant step, and I can tell you, I know a lot more about our reserve situation than I did prior to Friday when I read this report. And Kathy went on to say, or James, that there is still yet a lot of discussion to take place. There are targets to set. There are policies to make. That will come in due course. And final comment would be, right now we already are forewarned that we will be asked to consider probably at least 1.4% just to get started at getting these reserves out of the red and into the black. There will be some interesting discussions come January when this is put up against all the other needs of all the other departments. Stay tuned. It's going to be fun. Okay, I would like to move on, if I may, then to the item 5. This is the adoption or correction of council meeting minutes from June the 27th. Are there any errors or omissions? If I hear of none, then I'm going to declare them adopted. I will declare those minutes adopted. Let's go to communications. Port Dover Board of Trade, there are several communications. I'm going to deal with each one separately. The first one is the Port Dover Board of Trade asking for a special occasion permit for the Lynn River Music and Arts Festival, 85 Port Dover. This is the festival in Simcoe from August 4th to 7th, moved by Councillor Wells. This is for approval. I will need a seconder. Councillor Black has seconded that the special occasion permit requested for the Lynn River Music and Arts Festival, it says in Port Dover, but we really know where it is, in Simcoe on August the 4th to 7th, 2017, be approved subject to meeting all required approvals. Any discussion on that motion? Those in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Turkey Point Community Summerfest. Moved by Councillor Height, seconded by Councillor Wells, that the special occasion permit requested for Turkey Point Summerfest in Turkey Point on August the 9th through to the 13th, 2017 be approved subject to meeting all required approvals. Any discussion here? If not, those in favor? And again, these both are annual events. Nothing new. Same requests. It's been moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Geisens, that the special occasion permit for Bird Town Jamboree presents Cornstalk on September the 8th to 10th, 2017 be approved subject to meeting all required approvals. This is from Tony Duclos. Any discussion? Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. On to the next request from James Gardner, moved by Wells, seconded by Height, that the special occasion permit for the wedding reception of James Garner at Whistling Gardens Limited on August the 5th, 2017 be approved subject to meeting all required approvals. Discussion? Favor? Carried. Next is a request from David Beasley, moved by Wells, seconded by Height, that the correspondence of David Richard Beasley regarding the Eva Brook Townley Museum be received as information. Discussion. In favor? Carried. It's been moved by Councillor Wells and seconded by Councillor Geisens that the Ombudsman's final report be received as information. Any discussion? Those in favor? Carried. One to go from David Haviland. It's been moved by Councillor Wells and seconded by Councillor Geisens that the special occasion permit request of David Haviland at Bacchus Heritage Conservation Area on July the 22nd, 2017 be approved subject to the meeting. All required approvals. Discussion? In favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you for those, Andrew. We've been going in an hour and a half. Do you want to have a 5-minute stretch, and then I'll get you in 5 minutes, and then we'll go at her another hour before we break. Thank you. The what?
Parties are apparently more fun.
Oh, really? I wouldn't know. Where are we here? We are down to Council and Committee of July the 4th. Okay, I'd like to get started again, please. And we are on page 107. Okay, I'm on page 107 of the agenda. These are reports of committees. We'll start with the approval of the council committee meeting, which is July the 4th. It's been moved by Councillor Geisens and seconded by Councillor Height. He's not here. We have a problem. Wells, thank you for rescuing me. Geisens has moved, yes, I know, and Councillor Wells has seconded. That the minutes of the council and committee meeting of July 4th, 2017 be approved, with the exception of Resolutions 5 and Resolution 6, respecting the Eva Brook Donnelly Museum, and Resolution 9 and 10, which respect the backyard chickens bylaw, which are pulled for, they'll be dealt with separately in further discussion, and that consideration of Resolutions 5 and 6 be deferred on the agenda to be heard following the deputation of Wesley Wilson. So if you approve this resolution, we deal with the balance. We deal with Resolution 9 and 10 separately, and then we will wait and deal with 5 and 6 after the deputation, which will be after 5 o'clock. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, that is all in favor. I guess we should vote before I declare it carried. Thank you. So, just before I read the resolution on the backyard chickens from last week, the only reason I asked for this to be moved, and the only reason, Brian, you're sitting there smiling at me like I'm out of my mind dealing with this, but that's okay, Brian. He's getting a chuckle out of the chicken resolution, I can tell. It was brought to my attention by more than one individual that a number of families, particularly in the west end of the county, that live in our hamlets, and many of these hamlets do have a Mennonite community that do already and have for years had a few chickens in the backyard in these hamlet areas, and this would in fact, if passed, take that privilege away from them should there be a complaint. Only reason I bring that to your attention. It's been moved by Councillor Height, seconded by Councillor Sonnenberg, that staff report DCS 1757 backyard chickens feasibility review be received, and that the council approve the raising of egg-laying chickens within hamlet residential zones in Norfolk County for a trial period of 1 year, and that resolution number 10 of the council in committee minutes of July 4th, 2017 be deleted in its entirety. Discussion. Councillor Height?
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of people that already have chickens in hamlets, and it doesn't appear to be a problem now. There were some concerns addressed by some people that came before council, as well as some emails, and well, I can honestly say I have a chicken coop, an 8x8 one, and no coyotes get into it. The amount of manure that comes out of it, I have about a dozen chickens in there, is a wheelbarrow full a year. It goes good on your gardens if you put it in at the right time. But, you know, I have sheep on my farm. Coyotes like sheep. They come to my farm. I've never had a chicken go missing. Any animal that's out, ducks, they're gone. Right? The other night I had one come up onto my front deck, but they leave my chickens alone. And, you know, another option to get rid of coyotes from catching your chickens is male boar pigs. Coyotes don't like them, so I'm not sure if that'll be the next bylaw or motion that I'll present. I don't think so. But honestly, the hens are quiet. They coo and make a few noises, and other than that, they just go around doing their business. There isn't really a fly problem because chickens eat bugs. That's one of the things I think that makes their eggs taste so good. Right, so if you look at our hamlets, most of our hamlets, their backyards are basically on the backs of fields. So it's not really a problem for your neighbors because your neighbor's a cornfield or a soybean field or tobacco or ginseng, and it's not really a concern. And most of the people in the hamlets buy eggs off of the people who raise the chickens anyway. So I don't know what the big deal is over this, but 1 year is a trial period. I don't think it's going to kill our building and bylaw guys or do anything else for that matter, but I'd like to see it go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sonnenberg.
Interestingly enough, watching news this morning on TV and across the ticker tape at the bottom, Toronto councillors about to consider backyard chickens. The biggest city in this country is going to consider chickens in the backyard. And here we are, predominantly an agricultural community, and we're not going to allow chickens. I think we're wrong here. Chickens are not very onerous. They're not very disruptive. They're not noisy. They don't stink. They don't attract disease. That's all nonsense. A few chickens in a backyard won't hurt anybody. Thank you.
Any further comments? You've heard the motion. I'm going to call the question. Those in favor? What this is doing, if I may, and I want to be clear, this resolution is deleting Resolution 10 as printed from last week in its entirety, removed, and this is saying that we received the report 1757 from last week's information, and secondly, that we approve the raising of egg-laying chickens within hamlet residential zones in Norfolk County for a trial period of 1 year. No, nothing in the urban. No. Okay. Is there any other discussion? I don't want to ask for the question if it's not clear. Any other discussion? I'll call the question. Those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? 3. So that motion is carried, and it is a trial period for 1 year. Yes, Councillor Black?
So that's it? We don't have to do anything with the urban area?
With what?
We don't have to.
No,
because
they're not allowed there now.
They're
and
not allowed there now,
No,
okay.
Yeah, they're not allowed there now, and this motion only allows it for 1 year in a hamlet on a trial basis, okay? Thank you for that. We will deal with resolutions 5 and 6 on the Everbrook Downey Museum after the deputation. Okay, thank you for that. Let's go then to page 119. It's been moved by Councillor Sonnenberg and seconded by Councillor Height that the minutes of the Norfolk Heritage Committee meeting of April 24th, 2017 be received as information. Any discussion or concerns on these minutes? Those in favor? That is carried. You're going to dig 5 and 6 out of here for me? It's in there somewhere on the museum for later. Thank you, sir, if you don't mind. Health and Social Services, page 123. These are the minutes from the Advisory Committee of our Health and Social Services dated May the 18th, 2017. It's been moved by Wells and seconded by Sonnenberg that these minutes be received as information. Discussion, questions, starting on page 123. Those in favor of approval? That's carried. Thank you. You found them? You've got them separate. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's carried. Okay, let's get on with staff reports. We have a staff report under item 8. This is County Manager Report 1703, Development Review Process and Attachments are there. I'm on page 129. Mr. County Manager, would you wish to give your report? Thank you.
I do. But before I begin, I'd like to share the floor with Mr. Chris Baird, who this afternoon we obtained new statistics from his department, and I think they're extremely meaningful and will inform much of your debate. So I could just turn the floor over for a minute or two.
Thanks, Mr. Cripps. Mr. Mayor and Council, we've just completed the statistics for the mid-year on the building activity. Thought we'd share them with it because obviously it speaks to the purpose of the report that will be presented here shortly. So the mid-year statistics, just a few quick ones right now. To date, it was $78 million in construction value. That's far exceeds last year's, which was the record year. So we're on track to surpass the $110 million that we had last year. 63% more permits over the same time last year. We're at 635. And we've constructed in the first 6 months of the year 196 new homes across the county. 196. Again, these figures far surpass our 5-year running average and certainly exceed the same time last year. So these are the pressures. This is the activity coming through that front counter. On the planning front, we're well on track to meet the application. We had almost 290 applications last year, and we're on track to do the same. That gives each of our planners about 60 files that they work on in addition to all the policy work. So lots of activity there. So I'll turn it back to Mr. Cribbs. All of this information will be shared with you in the next couple of days. Fritz Enslin is going to provide a bit of narrative to talk about what these figures mean, and that we did think coming into the spring, because it was milder than usual, that a lot of constructors, we've got Mr. Bunting here in the audience today, a lot of builders were building right through those cold months where we would normally see just a few housing starts, but those numbers have kept right up. 55 new dwellings in June alone. So those numbers are really strong. Anyway, with that, we'll come back to this. We can certainly speak to it, but I'll turn it back to Mr. Cripps for his report.
I don't think it's hyperbole to say to you that this is one of the 3 most important reports you're going to get this calendar year, and depending upon your personal philosophy, it might be the most important report this council receives in 2017. 6 weeks ago, council instructed staff to come back to it with options and suggestions with respect to the development process and the building world as administered by the county. This report attempts to satisfy that instruction. It's a complex system. You know, in trying to think how to describe that, you just look at how the law comes together. Building Code, Fire Code, Ontario Clean Water Act, Planning Act, Highway Traffic Act, that's sort of the provincial control into it. Official plan and zoning, those are us, but we're also required to have those, and they have to have certain content within them. So those are sort of us and sort of the province. And then the Conservation Authority's jurisdiction. And because there are a heck of a lot of moving parts, there have to be a heck of a lot of moving pieces internal to the county in helping our development partners bring forward applications and ultimately bring them to fruition. Because it's complicated, there is no simple solution. We couldn't responsibly offer you any one item that's going to get it done. No one item would. After analysis, and you'll see under consultations, it was a large team of individuals looking at this in conjunction, a number of different types of professionals, but basically everyone involved internally. We listened to what the development industry had to say. That's a component. That's informed this report. We did our own analysis of ourselves, our process, our resources, our capacity. And between those two, we feel like we're bringing you a 3-part plan that hopefully responsibly addresses an immediate need, but as importantly or more importantly, future capacity. The very good news is that Norfolk's on a growth trajectory. 1.4% in population, says StatsCan in about March of this year. They reported that. All-time high in permits last year, and effective today, we know we're on track to smash our all-time best record. So it's very much an upward trend. And it's complicated, but the bottom line is, whether one is an expert in this area or not, we used to be at $60 million, and we had the exact same number of staff, the exact same process. The only, as we did at 110 last year, and we don't know the number this year yet. We know 78 million thus far, but it's going to be more yet again, obviously, than 110. And nothing's changed. And I don't care if you're baking cupcakes, if you're making cars, if you're doing haircuts, it doesn't matter what. Your process at 60 can't look identical to your process at 110 and beyond. And that's what we're attempting to address. So there are 3 substantive recommendations. The first of which required a lot of sort of soul searching and self-analysis, and that is the third part of the report, dealing with the information requirements. This was a major push, major item and bone of contention from the development community. And to paraphrase or simplify, there are a whole bunch of pieces of information that we require to be able to approve development applications. At the end of the day, you do have to have a way for the water to disappear, to follow all applicable law, to make sure that the property as designed and proposed is going to be safe. We can't get away from those requirements, but we didn't have to require them, as many of them, up front. And by requiring them up front, the development community, first of all, has to incur the costs early in the game. Having incurred those costs, if things change during the process, either their vision or the government's, ours, as we're interacting with them, it requires multiple addendums to these existing reports. So it's more cost to deal with an evolving process. And then we have to look at those. So you have to review it once, then you have to review it a second time, possibly a third. And so appreciating that it's not just cost we're imposing on the private sector, but it's time, it's additional delay. And it came from a good place, from a desire to try to address all the issues as quickly as we could. But that part of the system sort of evolved to a place where Ms. Robinson in particular took the lead and really examined closely what information and when do we need it. And so that's the third recommendation, has in fact already been put in place last, I want to say Tuesday, but maybe it was Wednesday. At any rate, on applications going forward, we're changing when we require information, some information, and we've tried to put as much of it as we could towards the back end, both to reduce time and cost. Cost to the private sector, time to the process, to the staff requirements. That's an important piece, and that, I'm happy to tell you, we've put in place. So that's an administrative matter. In and of itself, that will help. That doesn't get us where we need to be. The second piece is looking at our own administrative structure. There's a good reason, but since 2001, we've basically had the same structure. The only thing that's really changed is some of the staff have moved into the beautiful building on Robinson Street. Nevertheless, if you ignore where people work, how they're organized, and how they interact with each other hasn't changed in 17 years now that Norfolk County's existed. We have the capacity to move the engineering staff who are going to review those applications into that RAB building. And what's that going to do? That should bring far better communication, far better cooperation, far better collaboration. Everyone under one roof, everyone under the same floor, everyone working together consistently. One of the complaints we heard was the sort of the late in the application, the late in the process surprise. And sometimes that happened simply because the materials didn't get to the engineering technologists who were reviewing the plans until fairly late in the day. By making a new division within the department, by transferring those staff physically, but more than just physically, conceptually, putting them all in one place, in this case RAB, and ultimately under the guidance and leadership of Mr. Baird, we believe that a number of operational improvements in communications can be improved. That's, we think, about $4,000. We're not asking for money for that. We will find the funds to pay for that out of existing budgets. That's really a negligible amount. We would like to make that administrative change. We think that will lead to better service. That's 2 of 3. That's better communications, that's better cooperation, that's better collaboration. It's asking for less information up front. It's sort of delaying it as long as we can. So hopefully there are fewer amendments and fewer changes to the consultant reports and the various documents that the development community has to produce in order to ultimately get to the point where they have a building permit. And then the third part that you just can't change, and there really is no way around, is volume. As the report indicates, there are 2 technologists to 6 planners. There are 2 human beings who have to look over $110 million worth of applications. Again, it doesn't matter if you're talking about baking cupcakes or doing haircuts. It's 2 on 110. That's self-evidently a bottleneck. We've actually identified 2 bottlenecks when you look at staffing overall, and we believe we need help and assistance in 4 areas that collectively, or 4 people in 3 areas that collectively feed the entire process. In no particular order, from the planning perspective, we have some excellent, talented planners, and what we do is we use them to do everything. What we're proposing is a 2-year contract for a junior entry-level planner, that person would be based in Langton. We already have an office, a computer, everything's would be ready for him or her. We could start that person at the lowest end of the salary scale, assuming they were an entry-level planner, and that person could, their presence will effectively free up our senior planners to do senior planner work. So it's efficient on several levels, we believe. There's a GIS position. It's really hard to fully appreciate how critically important the GIS materials are. I can say this is week 12 for me, and every week I've been here, less this one, we've had multiple maps, aerial photography. Just think of every time there's a planning application of some sort. We all use and rely upon it. And we don't have the staffing to come up in reasonable time with that documentation and that process review. We know there's a bottleneck there. As the report indicates, a new staff member who we would undertake to start at the bottom of the wage scale, so again, an introductory position, that is one of our 2 bottlenecks, would enormously free up our existing senior staff to focus in on the major applications and the major balance of the work. Lastly, although in no particular order, there's the actual engineering and the technical review. To make this work, planning isn't more important than engineering, and engineering isn't more important than planning. They need to each have champions and each be a major focus with respect to the development community. For this to be effective, we need a development engineer who can, with a customer service focus, with a background specifically in development engineering, which is a different skill as opposed to many other aspects of engineering, shepherd applications through, identify technical challenges as soon as possible, which ultimately should, and we believe, will reduce the entire application process time by very quickly and very early in the process identifying problems and helping with the communication piece, beyond, of course, having the technical skill and knowledge. And then, of course, one more technologist to bring that population up to 3, which right now is the choke point at 2. That would create a division within that department, the equal of planning, located right beside planning, and would be a substantive and fundamental change to how the entire process works. So cumulatively, what is proposed here, and 1/3 has been initiated. We're demanding less information early on, so the informational requirements have changed. Secondly, we are looking to do a reorganization, which is to say, that in and of itself isn't creating jobs or eliminating them, it's moving them from one part of the corporation to another. And thirdly, it is our collective position that we simply lack the staffing necessary to process last year's $110 million worth of applications and work. We have a large backlog. It is not done. Last year's is still not complete. And this year, far more yet again. That the problem cannot get better unless and until we increase our capacity to actually work through the process and the demand. And based on the foregoing and in the totality of that, you have the report before you. I do have a piece of good news. And if I may, I'd like to direct you to page 134 of the report. I don't know that in life I have a problem admitting when I'm wrong, but it's not very often that I'm happy to do so. And in this case, middle paragraph, under financial services comments, second paragraph, based on the county's current fee structure, approximately 30% of planning staff salaries are recovered by fees. That was true in 2015. In 2014, as I am informed and have seen through documents, this council did approve a gradual increase in those fees over time. And so this year, as we speak, the percentage is actually 45%, not 30%. What is the material impact of that? Well, obviously, it's less demand off the levy. Were council to approve what has been proposed, we're looking at approximately $300,000 in salary. For the balance of this year,